Brilliance Audio presents White Lace and Promises, a novel by Debbie Macomber. Performed by Kate Rudd.
Maggie Kingsbury ground the gears of her royal blue Mercedes and pulled to a screeching halt at the red light. Impatient, she glanced at her wristwatch and muttered silently under her breath. Once again, she was late. Only this time her tardiness hadn't been intentional. The afternoon had innocently slipped away while she painted, oblivious to the world. When Janelle had asked her to be the maid of honor for the wedding, Maggie had hesitated. As a member of the wedding party, unwelcome attention would be focused on her. It wasn't until she had learned that Glenn Lambert was going to be the best man that she'd consented. Glenn had been her friend from the time she was in grade school, her buddy, her co-conspirator, her white knight. With Glenn there, everything would be perfect. But already things were going badly. Here she was, due to pick him up at San Francisco International, and she was 10 minutes behind schedule. In the back of her mind, Maggie realized that her tardiness was another symptom of her discontent. The light changed, and she roared across the intersection, her back tires spinning. One of these days, she was going to get a well-deserved speeding ticket. But not today, she prayed. Please not today. Her painting smock was smudged with a full spectrum of rainbow colors. The thick, dark strands of her chestnut hair were pinned to the back of her head, disobedient curls tumbling defiantly at her temples and across her wide brow. And she had wanted to look so good for Glenn. It had been years since she'd seen him, not since high school graduation. In the beginning, they had corresponded back and forth, but soon they'd each become involved with college and had formed a new set of friends. Their texts and emails had dwindled, and as often happens, their communication became a chatty note on a Christmas card. Steve and Janelle had kept her updated with what had been going on in Glenn's life, and from what she understood, he was a successful stockbroker in Charleston. It sounded like a job he would manage well. It surprised Maggie that in all those years, Glenn hadn't married. At 29 and 30, they were the only two of their small high school graduation class who hadn't. Briefly, she wondered what had kept Glenn away from the altar. As she recalled, he had always been easy on the eyes. Her mind conjured up a mental picture of a young Glenn Lambert. Tall, dark, athletic, broad-shouldered, thin. She smiled. He'd probably filled out over the years. He was the boy who lived next door, and they had been great friends and, at times, the worst of enemies. Once in the 6th grade, Glenn had stolen her diary and, as a joke, made copies and sold them to the boys in their class. After he found her crying, he had spent weeks trying to make it up to her. Years later, his patience had gotten her a passing grade in chemistry, and she had fixed him up with a date for the junior-senior prom. Arriving at the airport, Maggie followed the freeway signs that directed her to the passenger pickup area. Almost immediately, she sighted Glenn standing beside his luggage, watching the traffic for a familiar face. A slow smile blossomed across her lips until it hovered at a grin. Glenn had hardly changed, and yet he was completely different. He was taller than she remembered, with those familiar broad shoulders now covered by a heather blue blazer instead of a faded football jersey. At 30, he was a prime specimen of manhood. But behind his easy smile, Maggie recognized a maturity, one he'd fought hard for and painfully attained. Maggie studied him with fascination, amazed at his air of deliberate casualness. He knew about her inheritance. Of course he knew. Steve would have told him. Involuntarily, her fingers tightened around the steering wheel as a sense of regret settled over her. As much as she would have liked to, Maggie couldn't go back to being a carefree schoolgirl.